The dog didn't hesitate. The man did. Behind the bars of holding block C, Garrett Mace reached his hand out slow, like he was scared of what might come back. His K-9 partner, Rook, didn't bark, didn't wag, didn't move except to lean in and press his head against Garrett's fingers. It lasted seconds. But afterward, no one really spoke. Even the officers who testified against Garrett stood in silence, watching something break between them. Not loud, not messy, just broken. And none of us knew why the goodbye hit that hard, until the truth about the cabin in Hollow Ridge finally came out. The night Garrett Mace was arrested, the rain had no sound. It was coming down hard enough to blur the cruiser's windshield, yet the world outside remained unervingly quiet. Deputy Nolan Krell remembered that most. Not the blood, not the dog's growl, just the silence that clung to Hollow Ridge like smoke that wouldn't lift. The call had come in just past midnight. Possible gunshots, lights on in the old Bohannon property, abandoned since the foreclosure 5 years back. It was Garrett's name on the complaint, and that alone was enough to make Krell hesitate. A former deputy himself, Garrett had trained half the dogs in the K-9 unit, including Krell's own. By the time Krell arrived, the front door was wide open. His flashlight caught the beam of a rusted horseshoe above the frame, still hanging sideways. The yard had overgrown into a swampy mess of weeds and blackened tree roots. Every step crackled, every shadow twitched, and inside, crouched next to a blood-soaked tarp and whispering to his dog, was Garrett Mace. He didn't resist. He just kept one hand on Rook's neck and stared at the far wall like something was still there. "You need to stand up now, Garrett," Krell had said, his voice careful. "Put your hands where I can see 'em." "She's gone," Garrett whispered. Krell didn't ask who. The smell of iron in the room said enough. The town of Elmsway, population 3,402 on paper and probably 2,900 in truth, didn't handle scandals with press conferences or sweeping denials. They just stopped making eye contact with the people involved. Garrett's name disappeared from the K-9 trainer plaque. His framed commendations were quietly removed from the sheriff's office. The only thing that stayed was Rook. No one could bring themselves to reassign him. For a year, Rook stayed kenneled in the outskirts behind the training yard, walked daily by recruits who'd been warned not to speak his handler's name. But he stopped eating after 6 months. Then he stopped barking. Then came the night. He chewed through steel mesh and disappeared for 13 hours. They found him at the old Bohannon place, sitting by the front door, head tipped toward the upstairs window. After that, there was only one option left. Final request? Officer Darla Kent asked, clipboard in hand. Says here he didn't want a pastor. Callum Raines kept his arms crossed. He's asking to see Rook. In the cell block? Raines glanced through the glass into the visitor corridor where Garrett sat on the other side, hands folded, still quiet, older than his age. His face looked like it hadn't seen sleep or forgiveness in weeks. You were his partner, weren't you? Ken asked. I was his replacement. Raines said flatly. Right, Kent said, marking something off of the check. Visitor request is approved. 2 guards posted. Leash and vest on the dog. If either of them so much as... They won't. She paused. You sure about that? I'm sure Rook doesn't bite unless he's told to. The door, the holding block, see, buzz open. Garrett didn't lift his head right away. He just sat there on the concrete bench like he didn't expect the request to be granted. Rook patted in slow, almost cautious, his nose twitching once as he stepped inside. Then something changed. The moment Garrett looked up and whispered the dog's name, Rook's ears dropped and the entire weight of his body shifted forward in one graceful, almost sorrowful motion. He pressed against the bars. And Garrett reached out. His fingers curled through Rook's fur, finding the familiar ridge of muscle just below the collar. No words, no commands, just a long, reverent silence that held the room still. Officer Raines stood by the door, watching with his jaw tight. He'd never seen the dog react like that, not even in the field. You told the court you found her body in the cabin, he said quietly. Garrett didn't look up. I did, but you didn't kill her. I didn't say that. Then who did? Garrett slowly pulled his hand back through the bars. "You wouldn't believe me if I told you." There was a pause. Then Rook growled, not at Garrett, at something behind them. Raines turned just as a shadow moved across the frosted glass of the far door. But when he opened it, the hallway beyond was empty. A week later, Raines went back to Hollow Ridge. He didn't tell anyone, didn't sign out a cruiser, just took his own truck and a flashlight and parked half a mile up the road to keep the visit off the record. The Bohannon cabin hadn't changed, still half sunk into the woods like it was hiding from the sun. But Raines noticed something new, paw prints, fresh ones. They led around back into the old root cellar. He hesitated, then opened the hatch. Inside, the air was thick with rot and rust. His flashlight caught the edges of a broken lantern, a pile of torn bedding, and something that made his stomach knot, a child's sandal, half buried under dirt. He knelt, brushed the soil away, found bones, small, fragile, but there was more. Behind a collapsed support beam was a second tarp, this one untouched. Wrapped in it, tightly and methodically, was a file folded with crime scene photos from a case closed 3 years ago. The Fenton girl, missing, presumed drowned. But the background of one photo had a clear marking, the Bohannon property address. The very room he was kneeling in. Raines stumbled backward. Somebody had planted evidence here, or retrieved it and brought it back. But why? The answer came in a flash. Garrett had never said he killed anyone. He just said she's gone. He made the call to the sheriff's office before leaving the woods, sent a text with a GPS pin, then smashed his phone beneath his boot. He didn't want anything traceable. As he drove back toward town, the unease grew like ice in his chest. Because if Garrett had been framed, then someone inside the department had done it. Someone with access to sealed case files. Someone who wanted him silent. And someone who didn't think a dog would remember. Rook sat quietly in the rear kennel, but when Raines approached, he stood. Not barked, not growled, just stood and stared through the mesh like he already knew. Raines crouched down. "What did you see, huh?" Rook blinked. Raines reached forward, and Rook placed one paw against the wire. Across town, Officer Nolan Krell poured another whiskey and stared at the dark TV screen. In his living room, he hadn't turned it on in days. He'd made peace with what he'd done, or so he thought. But that visit with Rook had changed things. Garrett hadn't needed to say it. Rook had. The way he growled when Krell passed the hallway that day. The way he refused to look at him during training. The way he'd buried his head in Garrett's hands like a man praying for forgiveness. Krell finished the glass in one long pull, then opened his desk drawer. Inside, a file marked internal use only. It had photos, maps, names, and at the top, a sticky note, yellow with time. "Keep Mace quiet. If he talks, we all fall." Krell picked up the folder, and for the first time in years, he started to cry. The wind howled through Elm's Way the morning Garrett was scheduled for transfer. Officially, he wasn't going anywhere, just from holding Block C to final containment, 12 steps and one reinforced doorway. But every officer in the building moved slower than usual. Even the coffee tasted burnt. Rook hadn't eaten. They said dogs can smell grief, that they can feel the air go cold before it does. Officer Raines believed it now. He stood beside the kennel, Rook's leash slack in his hand. The dog just stared at the empty hallway where Garrett would pass. "You were there," Raines said quietly. Rook didn't blink. "You saw who did it, didn't you?" 5 days earlier, Sheriff Weller had called an emergency staff meeting no one could explain. Just past sunset, while the station hummed low with radio chatter and tired fingers tapping at reports, he summoned 6 officers to the basement conference room and locked the door from the inside. Officer Krell wasn't invited. He watched them through the crack of the evidence room, where he'd hidden with a bottle of stomach antacids and shaking hands. His name was still on those files, still signed at the bottom of the transport logs. The order to intercept the Fenton girls' case transfer. The authorization to reseal the Bohannon cabin as inaccessible. It was Raines who'd screwed it all up. That damn flashlight. That old root cellar. Krell had thought Garrett would crack, or stay silent. But now there were officers asking questions. And a dog, just a damn dog, pacing in circles like he knew who shouldn't have been in that room. The old man had warned them, years ago, when the evidence started misplacing itself. The dog remembers. In Hollow Ridge, the mist hung low, soft as milk but thick with something sour. Rain stepped out of his truck with a loaded Glock and a penlight. He'd parked further down this time. Didn't want his prints near anything anymore. Rook padded behind him without a leash. He didn't bolt. Just moved steady, nose down, eyes sharp. As they approached the cellar, he stopped, but not at the door. He turned to the woods. Rains felt it before he saw it. That eerie pressure in the chest, the one that prickles when you're being watched. Then he saw the shape. A man, lean, backlit by fog. Smoking. Evening, the figure said. Rains drew his weapon. Hands where I can see them. The figure didn't move. You know what they did to her, don't you? He said, voice cold. To the girl in the cabin. Rain's heart dropped. Who are you? You think Garrett did it? You think he could hurt a child? A pause. You've seen that dog. Does a creature like that want to kill her? Rains held steady. You were there that night. I was, the man said, and then he turned and vanished into the trees. Rook lunged but stopped short of the clearing. Something kept him back. Back at the jail, Garrett stared to the window slit in his cell. The sky outside looked heavy, like it had forgotten how to be blue. A tray of untouched food sat beneath the bunk. Footsteps echoed. Then the key turned. Deputy Nolan Krell stepped in, hands empty, jaw clenched. They're going to come for me, he said. Garrett didn't move. I thought if I kept it quiet, if I did what Weller said, it'd be over. But you didn't say a word, Garrett. You just let it sit. Garrett's eyes were tired. You left her there, Nolan. She was already dead, Krell whispered. You think that makes it better? You think I don't see her when I close my eyes? Garrett said nothing. I came to give you something. Krell stepped forward and pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket. It was torn from a case log, official, dated, and signed. He laid it on the table. Page 7. Look at the photo in the corner. Garrett unfolded it slowly. The girl, her body, covered in a gray blanket. Garrett's fingers trembled. She had the station tag on her wrist. He whispered. Why would she? Because she died in custody, not in that cabin. Krell's voice broke. We buried the report, reassigned the body, put her in the system as missing. The others signed off on it. And you followed orders, Garrett said bitterly. I followed silence. Krell turned to leave. One more thing, he said. Weller has plans. You're not supposed to make it to final containment. Then he was gone. That night, someone tried to open Rook's kennel. The locks had been changed earlier that week, but someone had a spare. The bolt clicked halfway before jamming, loud enough for Rook to wake and growl. A shadow backed away, slipping into the fog, but not before the dog caught a whiff of something, gun oil and peppermint chew. Weller. At sunrise, Rains returned to the sheriff's office with a sealed envelope and a USB stick. He walked straight to dispatch, handed it to Marion, and said one thing. If I don't show up by noon, play What's on This for the state marshal. Then he walked into Sheriff Weller's office, without knocking. Weller looked up from his desk, eyes heavy and red. Something on your mind, son? Rains dropped the child sandal on the table. Then the photo from the Fenton file. Then the incident report Krell had leaked. Weller's face didn't flinch. So you've been busy. I know what you did, Rains said. Weller leaned back in his chair. No, you think you know. That's the difference. You lied. You let an innocent man rot in that cell. You manipulated the case, the press, your own officers. You think Elm's Way would survive a real scandal? Weller stood. You think people want the truth? They want order. We gave them that. We kept this town from going under, at the cost of a child's life. She was already dying, Weller snapped. Overdose. Left in our lobby like trash. Her mother never even came back for her. We gave her peace. You gave yourselves a scapegoat. Weller paused, then nodded. I'm sorry it had to be Garrett. But some men carry more weight than others. He had the spine for it. You don't. Then he pulled open his drawer. Raines drew his weapon. Weller didn't flinch. He just smiled. You sure you want to do this? Raines didn't lower the gun. But from behind him, something barked. Rook. He had slipped in behind Raines, silent and focused, and his eyes were locked not on Weller, but on the far wall, a cabinet, a false panel. Raines walked over, kicked it in. Behind it sat a sealed lockbox. Inside, the girl's original medical file, a bloodied uniform patch from another officer, Sergeant Dalton, long since relocated, and a flash drive, the real evidence. Weller's face went pale. You just ended everything, he whispered. No, Raines said. You did that the moment you chose silence. 3 hours later, state marshals arrived. Weller was escorted out in cuffs. Krell turned himself in. 2 other officers resigned on the spot, and Garrett Mace, still silent, still haunted, was cleared of all charges. But he didn't smile. He didn't even speak. He just stepped out into the yard where Rook waited, leash loose in the wind, and knelt down. The dog walked into his arms like no time had passed at all. Garrett buried his face into the fur and whispered something no one could hear. Later that night, Raines sat on the porch of his father's old cabin with beer and the weight of the past heavy on his shoulders. Garrett walked up quietly. You ever going to leave this town? Raines asked. Garrett looked out at the trees. You ever going to stop carrying everyone else's guilt? Raines laughed once, dry and bitter. Garrett reached down and let Rook lean against his leg. There's something about goodbyes, he murmured. When they come too early, they never leave you. And in the quiet that followed, Raines finally understood what had haunted him all along. It wasn't the silence in the Bohannon cabin. It was the silence afterward, the way no one had spoken, the way Rook hadn't barked. Because some things only dogs can say. The courtroom smelled like old wood and older secrets. It wasn't the kind of place meant for redemption, just for procedure. The seal of the state hung above the judge's bench, dull and crooked. No cameras, no reporters. Just a handful of locals who hadn't stopped caring. Or couldn't. Garrett May stood beside his lawyer, in a plain shirt with sleeves too long, his posture coiled, not relaxed. He hadn't been shackled. Rook sat beside him, head low, eyes watchful. The court had made a special exception, service animal retention during proceedings pending formal exoneration. But anyone with a heart knew it wasn't legal paperwork that made Rook stay. It was something else, something deeper. When the judge finally spoke, it was with the voice of a man too tired for victory. The court formally vacates the conviction of Garrett Mace. All charges dismissed. State acknowledges wrongful imprisonment, sustained obstruction by senior law enforcement personnel, and evidentiary tampering. A pause. Then, you're free to go, Mr. Mace. The room didn't erupt. There were no cheers. Just a slow exhale from those who still had breath left. Garrett gave no reaction. He just reached down and scratched behind Rook's ear. The dog leaned in. Outside the courthouse, a crowd had gathered. Not for spectacle, but because sometimes people need to witness a man walking out clean, even if he walks like the weight never left. Marion from Dispatch stood near the front, her hair pinned and her eyes rimmed with red. Raines stood at the curb, hands in his pockets, watching the street like it might rise up and swallow them all. Garrett stopped when he reached him. Thanks, Raines said. Garrett gave a slow nod. I didn't come back for thanks. What then? Garrett looked down at Rook, then at the road leading out of town. Closure. Raines didn't ask what that meant. He didn't have to. They both knew it wasn't something Elmsway gave out freely. 2 days later, Raines walked Hollow Ridge one last time. Alone this time. No badge, no weapon, just a flashlight and a notepad full of questions that had never made it to paper. The cellar was still sealed, now with crime tape and concrete posts. But it wasn't the cellar he'd come to see. It was a tree line behind it, a narrow path, barely visible, overgrown with thorns and ghost white vines. According to the old zoning maps, it led to a fire road that hadn't been used in 20 years. But in the dirt, still faint, were paw prints. Old, deep, and human ones beside them. Rook had been here before. With Garrett, maybe with her. The girl, the one who never got a name on the front page. Just a closed file. Rains followed the prints for half a mile, heart thudding louder than the rustle of wind in the leaves. Then he saw it, an old wooden cross. Handmade, stuck into the earth at a gentle slope between two birch trees. No plaque, no dates, just a child's necklace looped around the middle, a butterfly charm, worn and tarnished. He stood there for a long time, then knelt, not to pray, just to understand. That night, Rain sat with Garrett on the back porch of the training yard. The dog, Rook, rested in the grass, eyes half shut, tail still. They'd both known he was slowing down. Garrett ran his hand over the scar at Rook's flank, the one from the first call they took together, the fire in Red Bluff, the girl in the closet who wouldn't speak, who clung to Rook like he was the only safe thing left. "You remember her," Garrett said aloud. Rook didn't move, but something in his posture changed, like a memory passing through him. Rain sipped his beer, quieter than usual. "I found the grave," he said. Garrett didn't reply. I knew the worst part of this town." "You didn't," Garrett murmured. "I know." They sat a while longer. Then Rains asked a question he hadn't dared until now. What really happened that night? Garrett's jaw flexed. He looked at Rook, then finally said, "She came back." Rains turned. "The girl's mother," Garrett clarified, "on the night of the storm, after being gone 2 weeks. Strung out, screaming. I was already there, trying to coax the girl into taking food. Rook kept placing toys near her, trying to calm her. He swallowed. Her mother lost it, started throwing things. Hit the girl. Hard. Rook intervened. I stepped in too late." Garrett's voice cracked. "She died before the ambulance made it. I tried CPR. Rook howled so loud, I thought the cabin would cave in. Why didn't you tell anyone?" "Because Nolan arrived 5 minutes later. He looked at me at the blood, and said, 'If this gets out, Elmsway's done.' Sheriff Weller showed up soon after. Said we could contain it. Spin it. Said no one wanted to hear that the girl had been failed twice." Rains shook his head. "So, they made it look like you did it." "I was guilty," Garrett whispered. "Not of killing her, but of trusting them." Rook let out a low, aching sound, almost like agreement. The next morning, Rook didn't rise. Garrett found him beneath the porch, still warm, his head resting on his favorite toy, a rubber duck chewed to the shape of a crescent moon. There were no signs of pain, no struggle, just rest, a clean, final breath. Garrett didn't call anyone. He wrapped Rook in the old deputy blanket and buried him in the field behind the training yard. Under the oak they'd sat beneath 1,000 times, watching other dogs run drills. Rains helped him dig. Neither of them spoke much. When they were done, Garrett placed Rook's collar on the mound. And then finally, he cried. Elmsway didn't talk about Garrett's exoneration after that. Not in the papers. Not at church. Not even at council meetings. But things changed. The plaque in the sheriff's office was returned. The K-9 program was renamed Rook Unit. And every year, on the day of the first frost, someone left a butterfly charm on the courthouse steps. No note, no signature. Just the symbol of the girl who'd been lost. And found again. Rains left town 6 months later. Not with a badge. Just a notebook and a promise to himself. That he'd carry stories like Garrett's somewhere people could hear them. Somewhere silence didn't win. Garrett stayed. Started training dogs again. Not for arrests. Not for search and rescue. For companionship. For second chances. Every dog he placed, he told the same story. About a partner who never gave up. A dog who knew the truth before anyone else did. And a goodbye that meant more than anyone understood at the time. Because sometimes it's not what we say, it's what we leave behind.